About a third of American adults are dissatisfied with their sleep. And when you're not sleeping, it seems to make everything else in your life suck. But what do you do about it? By the end of this video, you'll have a good idea of where to turn for solutions to your sleep problem. Hey there, Jessica here. I'm a therapist in Austin who specializes in sleep disorders, and I use science and creativity to get people sleeping. So, where do we want to start? I want to start out by talking about something called the paradox of choice. So, we tend to think that more choices are always better. But we've all been in that situation where too many choices just leads to overwhelm, and then we walk away having chosen nothing. So, there was actually an experiment done in the year 2000 using jam in a supermarket. There was a table that had 6 different types of jam, and there was another table that had 24 different types of jam. So the 24 jam table got a lot more traffic, but the 6 jam table had more actual purchasers. So I'll actually link that 2000 study below if you're curious. But why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about jam? You certainly didn't click on this video to talk about how to buy jam. Well, I discussed it because I think that finding medical care can feel really similar. So you can't sleep, common problem. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's estimated that any given year, about a third of Americans are dissatisfied with their sleep. So what do you do? Do you go see your primary care doctor? Should you see a sleep doctor? Do you need a sleep study? What about a therapist like you might see for depression or anxiety? There's apps, there's books. What do you do? So I'm going to put a card in. I recorded another video kind of breaking down the different types of mental health providers, psychiatrists, therapists. So if you're interested in that, I think it's kind of related to this. I'll link a card somewhere. It should be somewhere up at the top. Okay. So really the question is, why can't you sleep? So I want to help you find the right help for your sleep problem. So in order to point you in the right direction, we need to have some sense of the possible reason that you're not sleeping. The reason for the poor sleep really determines where you go. So what are some common sleep issues and how are they remedied? So I'm going to discuss in some depth insomnia, sleep apnea, circadian rhythm issues, and hypersomnia. Then I will briefly touch on a few other types of sleep disorders and what to do if you suspect those. Some sleep disorders can be treated by making some behavior changes, and some sleep disorders are going to need medical intervention. So, if you like what you're hearing so far, please be sure to subscribe so that you'll know when I post new content. So let's talk about insomnia. So insomnia is almost always purely behavioral. So unless your insomnia is directly caused by a medication that you're taking, a substance that you're using, or another medical condition, then your insomnia is a learned behavior that's become a habit. So what is the definition of insomnia? It's difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep. We tend to use 30 minutes as the cutoff for difficulty. So if it's taking you more than 30 minutes to fall asleep at night, you're awake for more than 30 minutes over the course of the night, or you're waking up too early by 30 minutes or more. It doesn't have to be all of those. It could be, or it may just be some. And then the other piece of it is how it impacts you during the day. So you worry a lot about it. People with insomnia really tend to think about sleep a lot and are very worried about it and are very committed to finding a solution. And they often feel less functional during the day as a result of the sleep problem. They feel like they're cranky, they're not functioning as well, they're not thinking as clearly. And then to before we diagnose insomnia, it's you have the problem, the sleep problem, at least 3 nights a week for at least 3 months. You do not need a sleep study to diagnose insomnia. So the way insomnia is diagnosed is an interview with somebody, maybe somebody like me, somebody that specializes in sleep, a thorough interview that rules in and rules out different things. Plus a couple of weeks of a sleep diary is going to confirm that we're looking at insomnia. And then your best bet for addressing insomnia is CBTI, or cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Sleep medications do tend to be effective in the short term. They're not always the greatest long-term solution. So I'm going to insert, I did a video, kind of an introduction to CBT for insomnia. So I'm going to do a card for that video. There's going to be lots of cards in this video. Okay, so that's insomnia. So now I'm going to talk about sleep apnea. So an apnea is no breath for at least 10 seconds. You can also have what are called hypopneas, which is reduced breath for at least 10 seconds. And then mild sleep apnea is 5 to 15 of these apneas or hypopneas per hour of sleep. And then there's also moderate and there's severe. 15 to 30 is moderate, 30 plus is severe. So what's happening is you stop breathing, your brain wakes you up, you start breathing again, and then you fall back asleep, and then the whole process repeats on and on and on throughout the night. So a sleep study is critical to diagnosing sleep apnea. A sleep study is not very useful for insomnia, but it's critical for sleep apnea. A sleep study will objectively tell you, do you stop breathing in your sleep? How frequently is that happening? So this is going to be something you're going to need to see a doctor. You can go see your primary care doctor. It depends on insurance. Maybe you need to get a referral. So either your primary care doctor or a sleep medicine doctor. You're going to need to go see one of those providers, maybe both, if you suspect that you have sleep apnea. So the most common treatment for sleep apnea, I'll just briefly touch on this because there's a lot of different options out there, but it's a device called a CPAP, which stands for continuous positive airway pressure. It essentially using pressure, splints open your airway so that you keep breathing. So I like to point out that you can have both insomnia and sleep apnea. In fact, it's common enough that we have a name for it. We call it COMISA, comorbid insomnia and sleep apnea. So a CPAP is a breathing treatment, not a sleep treatment. So your CPAP is going to help you breathe, but it may not necessarily help you sleep better if there's other barriers to you getting sleep at night. So very relevant to thinking about insomnia versus sleep apnea is making the distinction between being tired and being sleepy. I did a short video on that. I will link that above. But very briefly, sleepy is high likelihood that you're going to fall asleep. Tired is like fatigued, dragon, low energy, but not sleepy. You can be tired without being sleepy. So what would you want to look for if you're wondering if you have sleep apnea? So daytime sleepiness. So if somebody is falling asleep unintentionally during the day, particularly when they're doing something like they're sitting in a movie theater or they're sitting quietly after lunch or something like that. That's something to watch for. Loud snoring, like loud, persistent snoring, not occasional, like, oh, I was congested and I snored a little bit last night, but like the kind of snoring that makes your bed partner want to go sleep somewhere else. If anyone's ever seen you stop breathing in your sleep, that is for sure a sign that you need to go see a doctor, go see if you have sleep apnea. There's a couple of screener tools that are used for sleep apnea. They're not diagnosing, but they kind of just give you enough of an idea of, is there something there that we need to examine further or farther? Is it farther or further? Anyway, that doesn't matter. So there's the stop and the stop bang. So the stop, the S is for snoring, the T stands for tired. So the question is, are you tired during the day? Although I will say it's really kind of asking, are you sleepy during the day versus tired? Because they're different. O is observe. Has anyone ever observed you stop breathing? And then P is blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, even if it's being treated, that is something that increases your risk of sleep apnea. So kind of what I was told to do is if somebody endorses two or more of those S, T, O, or P, then it's a good idea to have them go see a doctor to see about the process of getting checked out for sleep apnea. And then the stop bang, the stop part is the same, but the B is BMI over 35. The A is age over 50. The N is neck circumference. So this is 17 for a man, 16 for a woman. And then the G is gender. So if you're looking at this stop bang, then you're looking for three or more that the person says yes to. Some people just use the stop. The issue with the stop bang is that, yes, sleep apnea is more prevalent. It's more prevalent in men. It's more prevalent in older people. It's more prevalent in overweight or obese people. But that also means it gets missed in women and younger people and thinner people. And so some people prefer to just use the stop rather than the stopping. And they're very easily find them online, but that kind of gives you an idea of what do you want to look for if you suspect, okay, is this the reason I'm not sleeping? Is it sleep apnea? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is circadian rhythm disorders. So sometimes people think they have insomnia when what's really going on is their circadian rhythm doesn't line up with their life. I did a deep dive into the circadian rhythm. I'm going to link that video. But your circadian rhythm determines the timing of when you're asleep and when you're awake. So circadian comes from the Latin for about a day. It's a roughly 24-hour biological rhythm that does a lot of stuff, but one of the things it determines is when are you asleep and when are you awake. If you've ever had jet lag, that's a circadian rhythm issue. So a typical adult is going to fall asleep sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. and wake up sometime between 6 and 7 a.m. Some people skew a little earlier. We call them larks, and they're normal. Some people skew a little later. A little is like 1 to 2 hours. We call them owls. They are also normal. It's when it gets to be so extreme and also it is interfering with somebody's life that we start to call it a disorder. So maybe somebody just cannot, no matter what they do, they cannot fall asleep any earlier than 1 a.m. And they cannot get going any earlier than 9 a.m. And it's impacted, like they're not making it to school, they're not making it to work, and their life does not permit them to have that schedule. Or it could be somebody falling asleep at 7 p.m. and waking up at 3 in the morning without an alarm. So no sleep schedule is inherently bad. And like it's not inherently unhealthy to stay up late and sleep late. If you're getting enough sleep, if you're getting good sleep, then at least from a health perspective, it's okay if you sleep, midnight to 8 a.m. or something like that. Schedule. Some people that are more delayed, they'll take a second shift job or they'll work something out with their spouse or partner that the spouse takes care of the kids in the morning and they take care of the kids in the evening. Some people just build their life around it. And then there's other people who really want to be able to sleep on a different schedule. And so I tease out, and really any sleep specialist that you see should be teasing out insomnia versus circadian rhythm issue because they look very similar, but the treatments are a little different. So essentially somebody with a circadian rhythm disorder, if they can sleep on their preferred schedule, they sleep pretty well. It's when they try to live on the schedule of their life that stuff gets messed up. A sleep study is not going to be that helpful in diagnosing a circadian rhythm disorder. So you diagnose it with a sleep diary, basically. So again, you do an interview, you ask questions, you kind of know what questions to ask. And then you have the person keep a sleep diary for a couple of weeks. And you can look at that and you kind of, if you start seeing this pattern of like the later they go to sleep, the better they sleep and the faster they fall asleep, then you can start thinking, okay, this is a circadian rhythm disorder. And then the treatment of a circadian rhythm disorder is also purely behavioral. So you treat it with properly timed light exposure and properly timed melatonin. I'm going to link a blog post down below that I wrote about melatonin. A lot of people use it for sleep. And there's stuff that it can do and there's stuff that it can't do. And there's reasons to take it and there's reasons not to take it, I guess I'll say. So I wrote a blog post kind of describing what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do. So I'm going to link that below. Also, just want to drop in, if you're finding this useful, please subscribe to my monthly newsletter. I send out a monthly newsletter. I write content about my specialties as a therapist. Sleep is one, but I also have others: PTSD, OCD, chronic pain, and radically open DBT. All right, so let's talk now about hypersomnia. So sometimes the problem is that you sleep or maybe too deeply. So, hallmark symptom of what we might call a hypersomnia disorder is excessive daytime sleepiness. So, there's a thing called the Epworth sleepiness scale. I give it to everybody that I see. If you've ever seen a sleep doctor, you've probably filled it out. It asks you to rate how likely you are to fall asleep doing, I think it's like 8 different activities, and you get a score. And if the score is 10 or higher, we would consider that to be excessive daytime sleepiness. So hypersomnia covers disorders like narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. So these are people that tend to be pretty sleepy throughout the day. They might be long sleepers, not always. There's differences between idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy, but they might be long sleepers that just never seem to feel like satiated or rested. They might struggle a lot with sleep inertia, which is just like, it's like you can't get going in the morning. It's like you're moving through sludge. It's like the opposite, basically, of like springing out of bed and just bouncing around and sleeping. So a sleep study is very useful here if you suspect narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia. It's an idiopathic is just a fancy way of saying we don't know why. Like, you're sleepy all the time, but we don't know why. That's all that means. So, of course, we're always going to want to rule out sleep apnea in anyone who is super sleepy during the day. Of course, you also want to make sure that it's not a medication side effect or a substance that somebody's using. So there's a particular type sleep study that's used to diagnose narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia. So you're going to have like an overnight sleep study, and then there's an additional study that they do during the day. So these conditions, idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy, are generally treated with medication. There's usually like some kind of a stimulant medication, some medication that can counteract that daytime sleepiness. In the case of narcolepsy, there's another symptom. I'll just drop this in. There's a symptom called cataplexy, which is a kind of like a sudden loss of control over your muscles. So the person might stumble or slur their speech. They don't typically like fall, like drop off and fall asleep necessarily. They could fall if they're like walking downstairs or something like that. There's also medications that will address that symptom. And then there's a fairly new form of cognitive behavioral therapy for hypersomnia. I think that the people that wrote the manual, put it out in like 2020, so it's pretty new. But there's also kind of some options for skills and support, and because it's more than just medication. I mean, that's the primary treatment, but people with narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia, even if they're properly medicated, so to speak, are still going to have quality of life struggles. And so there are things that you can do like from a behavior standpoint. But standard approach for hypersomnia is medication. And then I'm just going to really briefly touch on a few other sleep disorders. I'm not going to go into much detail about these, but if you would like a video kind of going into more depth about really anything that I've mentioned in here, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I will be happy to make another video about a topic that people are interested in. So nightmares are a learned behavior that's become a habit. Assuming that it's not a medication side effect. So some medications will impact your dreams. A lot of like antidepressants and stuff like that can make your dreams a lot more vivid. And so making sure it's not that. Nightmares are actually something that you can treat with like behavioral treatments. There's actually a form of cognitive behavioral therapy for nightmares where you won't go into a bunch of details, but you kind of like re-script the dream. And it might sound like there's no way this can work, and it does. So could be nightmares. Nightmares are also there are medications for nightmares, but really like some like cognitive behavioral type of therapy I think is going to be the best approach there. Restless legs. So this is diagnosed with an interview. So it's just asking people about their symptoms. It's kind of feeling this like extreme discomfort in your legs in the evening, usually when you're relaxing, trying to fall asleep. It might be pulling or like prickly sensations or tightening, or but it's like you feel like you feel this urge to like move your legs. And if you move your legs, it feels better, but as soon as you stop moving, the sensation comes back. That might be something that's interfering with your sleep. There's also something called periodic movement disorder, which is where you're like kind of twitching and jerking in your sleep. That's a sleep study is going to want to address that. And basically, I would for periodic, I mean, if you're like really sleepy during the day, I mean, you're falling asleep, like you cannot stay awake, then it could be sleep apnea, it could be a hypersomnia disorder, it could be periodic movement disorder, a lot of different stuff. But all of those things, a sleep study is going to be needed to diagnose it. And then finally, there's something called REM behavior disorder. So REM standing for rapid eye movement, which is a stage of sleep where most of your dreaming happens. So when we're dreaming, when we're in REM, we should be paralyzed. Our bodies should not be able to move because it keeps us from acting out our dreams. Well, in REM disorder, that goes awry and they do act out their dreams. So it's often violent. It's often like punching and kicking, can be really dangerous for themselves, for anyone they're sharing a bed with. So if you've ever been told that you act out your dreams, if you punch and kick, then I would recommend going to see a doctor, getting a sleep study. Sleep study is going to diagnose that. All right, so I'll just drop in one more question. So what other sleep topics do people want me to cover? Or is there something from this video that you'd like me to expand on more? Let me know in the comments. All right, so I'm gonna bring this thing in for a landing. So if you are located in the state of Texas and you are having trouble with sleep, would like to work with somebody who specializes in sleep, then you can reach out to me. My website's in the description. I am also going to include, there's a couple of directories. I think one's national and one's international for people who specialize in sleep. So if you're not located in Texas, I can still offer you a way to try to find somebody. There's a blog post that kind of corresponds with this video. I'm going to link that below. And all right, I think that is everything. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope that this was helpful, and I also hope that you have a lovely day. Bye.